verse 3 of Psalm 130. We're all broken sinners. Thank God for God. Thank God for Jesus' sacrifice. Otherwise, we're screwed. We have no chance.
Yeah, son. Welcome to the Bible in 1 Year podcast, brought to you by two Brits and a Bible. If you like the idea of a casual yet meaningful chat about the Bible with a couple of mates listening, something here could be good for you today.
Today is day 190, covering Psalms 126, 127, 128, 129, 130, 131, and 132. If you need a brief overview of those chapters, they're in the description below.
Tis I wonder if I've written down the right point this time, though, because that was just a gong show yesterday.
That was funny.
126, 4 to 6-ish. Restore our fortunes, Lord, streams in the Negev. Those who sow with tears will reap with songs of joy. Those who go out with weeping, carrying seeds to sow, will return with songs of joy, carrying sheaves with them. And I just put the note, it's about beauty from ashes, really. And we need to, well, I'll come on to that point in a minute. It's also just reading it reminded me of the Beatitudes, which you mentioned the other day, which is a really cool sort of extra little segue in there and just it tying in together.
Yeah.
And then when I was reading through this, the point that I sort of came to was actually sometimes we need to let parts of our life die in order to see new life elsewhere and new growth elsewhere. But
right.
That's not necessarily a comfortable thing or a nice thing, but we have to let those other parts of us, not even necessarily bad parts. There are some trees and there are some pampas grass and stuff that needs to be burnt and killed in order for new growth to come through. It's bad stuff that's being taken out, but better stuff needs to come through. So you need to get rid of the old. So yeah, it was that point really.
Yeah, that's really cool, dude. I love that. And absolutely. There's actually a secular / he might be Christian, but not fully professing right now, called Jordan Peterson, who I've probably mentioned before on this channel. He actually lives pretty close to you, really. He's a Toronto boy. But anyway, he talks all the time about to become the person that you want to be, you have to let parts of yourself die to get there. So, you know, there's a lot of wisdom in that, like from a psychological viewpoint as well as business.
Yeah.
I had 126 verse 5. Those who sow with tears will reap with songs of joy. So that absolutely complements what you were saying, partly because it's literally from the part that you were saying from. But it also reminded me of when we were talking about the silver refinement process a few probably weeks ago now. Yeah. And also the book of James again, that suffering is a blessing. So if you weep as you're sowing your harvest, your crops, often that, and then I suppose also the tears, it's like watering or whatever, like the pain is part of the process to get to the joy.
Yeah.
And ain't that the truth? Like quite often when you've gone through the most painful things, you've come out the other end the most happy in the long run. It's almost that contrast sometimes.
Yeah. I
so there you go.
Heard a decent sort of bit of script or a bit of a preach or something a while back now, and it's talking about refining gold, very similar to the point that you were making from what you'd seen with the refining silver. And it was like, in order to get the impurities out of gold, it's the same thing. You have to melt it. But in order, like you look at a gold ring, I don't wear a gold ring, I wear a tungsten ring, but you could look at a gold ring and it looks like gold. But to see the impurities, it has to be melted. It has to be put through hardship and trial and heat. And in order for the impurities to come out, and often in our own lives, it's only when we're going through difficulty and frustration and challenge that our impurities suddenly come to the surface and we realize we're not as patient as we think we are. We don't have the best mouth in the world, all that kind of stuff, to be like, whoa, where did that come from? But we need to go through that in order to get it out. Well, not that you have to get out your swearing, you have to swear as much as you, not that, but yeah, that sort of point really. And so the whole thing all keeps rolling around to itself, doesn't it?
100%. Yeah, dude. Yeah, absolutely. Psalm 127 then, you want to take the honors, sir?
Yeah, why not, one of us has to. And so 127:1, unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the guard stands watch in vain. And this is good to hear because this is another Psalm of Solomon. And it's just from the Psalm that we read previously of him, where it was actually more about him than about God. This seems like a good one where he is then really relying on God and God's strength and knowing and acknowledging that without God, what he is doing is worthless and pointless. So I feel like I was pretty harsh on Solomon last time. So sorry, Solly.
He's up and down as our Solly. 127 verse 3, children are a heritage from the Lord, offspring a reward from him. And my note isn't that helpful. I just put, heck yeah, go forth and be fruitful. But I think, in our society, not so much in Christian culture, but in general secular culture, we don't always value children as much as we should. And we maybe see them as a bit of an issue in certain circles and whatever. There's even this horrible term that some people use of like breeders, like if you have kids, you're a breeder or whatever, which I just think is awful. But they're a reward in some ways from God. So if you have kids or if you're seeking kids, just see that as a huge blessing. Adam, obviously, you've got 2 kids. Fantastic.
Yeah, and they're bloody nuisances. They're great. I occasionally call them feral child 1 and feral child 2 because, well, the youngest one, Kinsey, she is a little bit feral, but she's a cute little ragamuffin with like curly hair. She's wandering around drinking out the dog's bowl, and she's wonderful. I love her to pieces, but she's feral.
She thinks she's a doggy. That's hilarious. Anyways, 128, I'll take the honours because why not, even though it's 128.2 from you, so it makes no sense. You should go first.
All right. 128.2 then, you will eat the fruit of your labour. And I just wrote, we reap what we sow. And I don't need to explain it anymore.
Yeah, no, fair enough. 128 verse 3, your wife will be like a fruitful vine within your house, your children will be like olive shoots surrounding your table. And I mean, we do reap what we sow, absolutely, especially in an eternal sense. But in life, it so rarely is that black and white, isn't it? Like, it's rare that it's like, oh yeah, I was good this week, so good stuff's happening, or I was bad this week, so bad stuff's happening. You have to think of the decisions you're making and whether those decisions align with the decisions God would want you to make. But also you've got to think of it in that more eternal sense. Like, you aren't perfectly punished and rewarded in this life, unfortunately. So this also, I talked about this guy called John Piper last week, I think it was. Sometimes even really good, hardworking pastors have kids that don't seem to, follow the Lord and stuff. Yep. So there's something deeper and more wise to it all. It's God's plan, but in the moment, it isn't always that you're good and therefore your wife and kids are good, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we just have to do our bit and trust in God as well for the rest of it. But that is very true. Why don't you jump in with one? Well, we've got a similar point in Psalm 130, so
yeah,
cool.
It's basically the same, isn't it? If you, Lord, kept a record of sins, Lord, who could stand? Verse 3 of Psalm 130. We're all broken sinners. Thank God for God. Thank God for Jesus' sacrifice. Otherwise, we're screwed. We have no chance.
Yes, son. I just wrote in here, so 130 verses sort of 3 and 4, like we just said, if you, Lord, kept record of sins, Lord, who could stand? But with you there is forgiveness, so that we can, with reverence, serve you. And I was like, is this a kind of a prophecy towards Jesus as well? Because, like, was he talking about forgiveness of sins just purely through the animal sacrifice of the Old Testament, or was there something? It sounds like, but with you there is forgiveness, not right. With sacrifice there is forgiveness, but with you there is forgiveness. And so I didn't know whether that is like he's kind of prophesying about Jesus or what. Wasn't too sure.
No, I'm not above my pay grade. Probably yours, probably a lot of people's. But yeah, that's a really good point, though.
No kidding. Then Psalm 130, I had a couple more points, I suppose. But in Psalm 132, that's probably the biggest one that I had in here. The Psalm's basically referencing David and what he said. And it's saying, like, Lord, remember David and all his self-denial and stuff like that. And I was, again, just above our pay grade. Like, was this sort of written record, like where it says, like, all the records can be seen in the book of the kings of whatever? Or was this like word of mouth and spoken through? Obviously, they didn't have Bibles like we have them today, but it's very accurately recalling David and David's words and how David lived and acted. And I was like, was this just from previous old school written records? Like, they didn't have whatever they're called, the Pentateuch, and they didn't have again, outside of our pay grade, above our pay grade.
That's cool though. All right. Well, tomorrow's readings are going to be Psalms 133 to 139. So why don't you beautiful people pick up your Bible and get reading?
In the meantime, and please like and share and subscribe this to help spread the word of God.
At 2 Brits in the Bible.
Yeah, do that as well.